Return of the Bird Tribes, Chapter 9. Tree of Peace. The vision that first came to me one starlit evening some 5 winters ago was now rapidly becoming reality. During the past year, the Seneca had become the 5th nation to agree to the peace. A gathering of the principal representatives of the Iroquois tribes had now been called to formally establish the League. For months, runners and braves had been traversing the countryside, inviting not only the chiefs and leaders, but all who cared to attend to meet at the headwaters of Onondaga, a sacred lake in what is today Upper New York State. They were told to gather around the largest tree that could be found 4 days before the full moon, when the geese fly south. Virtually every inhabitant of the 5 nations who was fit to travel set out that fall for the appointed location. For weeks they had been coming, gathering, camping in anticipation of this historic and long-awaited occasion. By the time Hiawatha and I arrived, there was no question as to the largest tree. It stood prominently in the center of a huge, natural basin at the edge of the lake. The surrounding area, as far as the eye could see, was filled with the encampments of the 5 nations. The basin itself, however, had been kept clear, for it and the open area around the base of the majestic pine had been designated as the site of the first Supreme Council of the new Iroquois Confederacy. It was on a windy and sunny morning that Hiawatha and I arrived. In silence, the others gathered to greet us. With no words spoken, the chiefs and principal warriors of the Seneca, Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, and Mohawk nations joined us in forming a circle around the base of the magnificent tree. Surrounding our circle were thousands of men, women, and children. They had come not so much to hear the words that were spoken at this historic meeting, for voices did not carry much beyond the circle of the Central Council, but to feel the spirit of the occasion. Though there were many thousands gathered around us, so respectful were they, and so silent, that our initial prayers were broken only by the sound of woodpecker and chattering squirrel. For 3 days we observed the wigwam of silence. From dawn until dusk no words were spoken. On the 4th day, the wigwam of oratory began. Standing upon a great moss-covered rock about 30 feet from the base of the towering pine, Hiawatha spoke with the eloquence that had served our purpose so well during the preceding years. He spoke of the bird tribes, the winged beings of light who come to earth, calling up these mortal bodies of flesh. He spoke of the law that rules throughout the natural world, the law that one receives in the course of a lifetime exactly what he or she has given, that one experiences oneself the same conditions that he or she creates for others. Hiawatha spoke of the great peace that the whole of the Americas had experienced for hundreds of generations when this simple law was honored, respected, and understood. All present could not hear his voice, but the leaders in the central circle followed closely every word that he offered. For by this time Hiawatha was regarded as the finest orator that perhaps had ever walked the Americas. Many of the chiefs were not only listening to what he said but studying his manner, that they might bring something of his spirit to their own people as they in turn spoke of these truths in the years that would follow this momentous event. Hiawatha spoke of a great lie that had become deeply rooted in the hearts and in the consciousness of all the world's people. A great lie, he called it, that had stolen the happiness and disrupted the harmony of the nations here gathered. Recognizing the opportunity for a symbolic teaching that could be witnessed by all present, Hiawatha referred to this great lie as I had once before. The Tree of War, he called it. And throughout the multitude that surrounded us, the words were quickly whispered from one to another. The Tree of War, Hiawatha repeated, has been as firmly rooted in the habits of our most recent generations as this pine is rooted in the earth. It may seem that a tree as large as this is too well established, too firmly implanted to ever be removed. And yet, he said, this giant of the forest can be toppled by something as simple as this. Here Hiawatha held up a single hand. And though every word was not conveyed to the multitude, the gist of Hiawatha's meaning was soon grasped by those present. He paused until it was understood. And then he continued. Something as simple as a human hand, created by the Great Spirit with 5 fingers, each one separate and individual and independent. Something this simple can topple this great tree when the 5 fingers work together as one. When our 5 nations, who are separate, are working together, we have great power. Let our 5 nations become the 5-fingered hand of the Great Spirit. Let us eradicate the tree of war, the habits of warfare, the ways of violence, not only from our nations, but from the nations we will influence in the generations to come. Human hands serving the purposes of the Great Spirit, given again to the purposes of peace, can uproot even this greatest of all trees in the forest. We paused then, and I spoke quietly to the spirit of the tree, asking its understanding. Would it be willing, I asked, to release this particular tree form and inspire another instead? Would it open itself to a death as glorious and meaningful as its life had been? Your life has been a good, long, healthy one, I said. You have served the forest well. But the 2-footed dwellers of this land need a teaching that only you can provide. They need this teaching that they too might serve the forest and its creatures as you have served. For the sacred cause of peace between the human nations, would you be willing, O Grandfather Pine, to open yourself to a death that will inspire all human races for generations to come, to be remembered in song and legend as long as there are people in this world? All assembled waited for the tree's response. Slowly, Gradually, we felt the emotional language of the tree speaking to our hearts. Yes, the spirit of the tree replied. I have long known that this summer was to be my last, that the time was near to release this form for another. Such a death will be an honor. I have been waiting for you, Dagon Wida. Proceed. Then Hiawatha invited those present to bend down and, using only their hands, to begin digging into the ground, into the forest soil beneath the needles and moss. And all joined and began digging a trench around the base of this tree that Hiawatha likened to the well-rooted tree of war. He forbade the use of any tools or implements, but the enthusiasm of the chiefs was strong, and as they dug, their hands were joined by the hands of all those who were able to get near enough to be of any use. Soon a deep trench appeared around the base of the tree, and it was not long before the ancient branches rippled slightly as a light shiver ran through the tree from the ground upward, signifying the departure of the spirit. The first beginning creaks of instability were faintly audible around its base. Hiawatha held up his hand and called a stop to the digging. He invited me to step from among the circle. I walked through the trench that surrounded the tree and climbed until I stood beside the mighty trunk. Working together, I said, holding up my hand, fingers spread for all to see. Working together as the fingers of one hand, our 5 nations have great power. For behind us, then, is the power of the Great Spirit. When we align ourselves with the purposes of heaven and act in common accord, we have all the natural forces working with us, supporting us, helping us. Though the truth may be simple as a human hand, and though it may be gentle as a hand, aligned with the powers of heaven and the powers of earth, that single hand can stand up to the greatest lie, to the most entrenched habit or tradition, to the most stubborn and firmly rooted illusion, and that single hand can topple it as easy as my single hand now topples this tree. During the time I had been speaking, many claimed they saw towering above the trees the great winged beings of light who bring the Creator's power to the earth. As I placed my hand upon the tree, many claimed to have heard the rustling of their wings. But even those who did not see or hear these things felt the rush of wind that joined my human strength as the great tree, with a rumbling, crackling eruption, ripped itself from its roots in the earth and fell crashing to the forest floor. The power, sullenness of the occasion were so marked, not one warrior's head turned, not one human heart in fear skipped a beat. Such a deep atmosphere of trust filled the assembled multitude. No one was injured in the fall of the tree. Some said they saw it caught by the hands of angels and gently lowered to the ground. There were also those who said in after years that I had toppled the tree of my own accord. But so it is that stories grow. So it is that legends are made. Neither Hiawatha nor I lost any time in making the fullest use of the symbolism. The fallen pine had left a cavity so large that a subterranean current of muddy water could be seen moving sluggishly in its depths. We invited all present to throw into the gaping cavity all weapons that had ever shed human blood or in any way been used in war. During the rest of that day, as the sun slowly sank into the west, warriors followed the examples of their chiefs, and soon the cavity was filled with a great assortment of weapons that would never again be used against human beings. When the sun rose the next day, all hands joined together in throwing the rich forest soil over the cavity that now contained the discarded implements. Soon there was a great mound. When the weapons of war were buried beneath nearly 6 feet of earth, Hiawatha climbed to the top of the mound and spoke. "Here, beneath our feet, is where all weapons of war belong. Among the currents that flow in the nether regions, beneath the level of human knowing, beneath the level of our interest or concern. Let us bury these weapons of conflict and release the hatred and mistrust that produced them. They do nothing for our people but cause suffering. They do not serve the needs of those who use them half so well as commerce, communication, brotherhood, and cooperation. Let us bury these weapons from sight, never to be considered again, and in their place let us plant a new tree, a tree of peace and understanding." With a well-proportioned young white pine that I had carefully selected and prepared, I climbed to the top of the mound to join Hiawatha. As I held the tree, Hiawatha knelt and scooped out a place for it in the freshly turned soil. When the place was prepared, I knelt beside him. Together, we planted the new tree, the tree of the Great Peace, the tree that, in centuries to follow, became the most well-known tree east of the Mississippi, the tree of the great long leaves. As the leaders of the 5 nations sat in a circle around the newly planted tree, Hiawatha spoke to them in a new way, in a new tone, with a spirit that he now drew from all our hearts, with a voice that was only made possible through the profound harmony and agreement of the thousands who had gathered with us. "We are at the beginning of a new time," he said, "a time when the violent tendencies of human beings on islands far from the shores of this lake, far from this forest, far from any lands that we know, will grow and become ever more restless. We are living in the beginning of the end times. It is good because it is the beginning of the healing that will remove the dishonest tree of warfare from human hearts forever. But just as the darkest hour of the night is just before the dawn of the new day, so things will get worse before they get better. We are living in the beginnings of times when the lies that turn hearts from the path of peace will whisper more vigorously in human thoughts than ever before. So it is fitting, at the beginning of these times, when the powers of warrior ways will grow in the hearts of peoples far from these shores. Right and fitting that we honor the precedent of peace established here long ago. We are living in the land where people from all parts of the world will one day come to be healed. It is appropriate that today we plant the tree of the peaceful way. This tree we have planted here will grow and flourish in our understanding, in our children's, and in our children's children's. For 12 more generations, this tree shall be strong. And during these generations, much better ways will come to all the people who live beneath its teachings. The truths of this tree will flower, not only in Iroquois hearts, but in the hearts of tribes and nations far from these shores. But then a violent storm will come. A pale race will come from the east. They will be more numerous than all the game from here to the hunting ground of the Dakota, and in this storm, which will last for 5 long centuries, the tree of the great long leaves will be utterly demolished. Not one twig or needle will remain to be found. Men will have even forgotten where it once stood. A time of sorrow far worse than any we have ever known will fill all our lands. The numbers of our people will become few. Our songs will be forgotten. Yet, just when the grandmothers and the grandfathers begin to lose hope, just when the last storytellers have almost forgotten, suddenly it will be seen that in the very storm that uprooted the tree of the great long leaves, its cones were carried to the 4 directions, its seeds scattered by the far winds. In the hilly country it will have quietly taken deep root, but it will grow unnoticed at first. The white race from the north will bring with them a powerful black people from the south, and in time, from the direction of the setting sun, they will be joined by a yellow people. These 3 races will come from the 3 directions to meet us here on these very hunting grounds. Our children will mingle with their children, and when the storm is past, the ways of peace and cooperation will flower among the people of the world and spread to every land, and all the Great Spirit's children will live together in harmony. Someday, spoke Hiawatha, these same thoughts that flower in our understanding today will reach out into the stars, beyond the farthest cloud, and bounce back, echoing the teachings of the flowering tree. And all the nations of the world will hear these thoughts of peace and be amazed. They will know then the thoughts of God. The songs of the winged ones shall be sung again in the villages of the earth, and the people of the 4 races shall, after that, live as one, even as the many leaves of this tree live as one. And there shall be no more war, nor sickness, nor untruth. I give this prophecy to tell your children and to your children's children, to repeat around your teepee fires in the generations to come. When the great storm comes, and it seems that the truth is for a time extinguished, hold fast, my brave ones. Remain true, my chiefs. Be steady, all you healers and children of the Great Spirit. For from this beginning that we make today will come eventually When the storm of 5 centuries is past, a new world where the peaceful ones will rule. And in that world the barbarous custom of warfare shall have so far receded, even the storytellers will have forgotten it. Today, we make a covenant with the peoples of our 5 nations. We make an agreement to honor the ways of love, the ways of justice, the ways of peace. We are not in truth a separate people. Each one of us here in this multitude is a single leaf on the Great Spirit tree. When we go within ourselves to touch the river of life that runs at the heart of our innermost being, each one of us touches the same life that flows within our sisters and brothers, even as the same sap flows through all the leaves of a tree. Your life is God's life. The Great Spirit is not just outside you, but within you as well. Listen to the Great Spirit. In your innermost thoughts, you will hear teachings superior to any that I or Daganwida will ever share with the words of our mouths. Hiawatha paused and bent his head while those present considered this truth. After a moment, he looked up and continued, speaking louder now, so that his voice carried even to the distant rim of the basin. Just as you do not see the leaves on any healthy tree in the forest contending among themselves or fighting with one another, so neither is there any need for people to contend or fight or in anything but friendliness compete. When the Great Spirit is known within, in communities where truth and honesty are honored, people live in harmony with one another. They experience their own life and the life of the Creator as one. They know that our people are like the leaves, and our tribes like the branches of a wondrous tree. They know that the life of the 2-footed and 4-footed and winged ones, the life of the plants and rivers and seas, the life even of the very sun, moon, and stars grows also from that tree. All come from one single trunk of being, the eternal being that we know as God. In this way, the Great Spirit lives within all things, within every plant and animal, every tree, every one of us here present. As Hiawatha spoke these words, he moved about the mound, making descriptive gestures, drawing pictures in the air, pointing at times to the newly planted tree, evoking all the passion of his former warrior spirit. He channeled an enormous energy into conveying to those gathered not just an idea or a concept, but as much as he was able, an actual experience of the awareness that he himself knew in those moments. One could sense the chiefs, as they felt it, understood it, and experienced it each in turn. From time to time, one of them would stand and, with a spirit nearly as beautiful as Hiawatha's, share a word or two of the great truth as it pertained to him and his people. But the chiefs kept their comments brief, for I think, like myself, they were truly awed by the Great Spirit whom Hiawatha in these moments had obviously become. Some say that as Hiawatha spoke, they saw a great winged form extending high above him into the trees. I saw only Hiawatha, but I saw him as I have known him in the Andes, in the Himalayas, and once again upon the shores of the Sea of Galilee. There was no presence overlighting Hiawatha. The great eternal spirit that is the reality of every human being had simply found a welcome home in his heart.